All right, so freedom and equality, two ideals at the very heart of, well, the American experiment, you could say.
Absolutely intertwined ideals right from the start.
But as we're about to discover, the story of freedom and equality in the U.S. is a lot more complicated than you might think.
Yeah, full of twists and turns and contradictions.
That's exactly why we're doing this deep dive. We're going to unpack an excerpt from U.S. Ideals, Freedom and Equality.
Which is a fascinating read, really gets into how these ideals have played out.
And sometimes clashed, right? I mean, you have this nation built on the declaration that all men are created equal.
But at the same time, the original Constitution actually protected slavery.
Yeah, talk about a contradiction. How do we make sense of that?
Well, we have to understand the context. The Founding Fathers, when they wrote those words in the Declaration...
All men are created equal.
Right. All men didn't actually mean all men. You know, it excluded enslaved Africans, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
But also women, indigenous populations. So right there at the foundation, you have this tension.
Between the ideal and the reality.
Exactly. And that tension, it runs through so much of U.S. history. Like, it's what ultimately leads to the Civil War.
Right, this brutal conflict over the very meaning of freedom and equality.
A turning point, for sure.
So the Civil War ends, you have emancipation. And I think most people would see that as a huge step forward.
Absolutely. A monumental shift.
But it wasn't as simple as, problem solved, right?
No, not at all. Even the Emancipation Proclamation itself, it was a strategic move by Lincoln. Initially, it only applied to states in rebellion against the Union. And even after the war, the path to true equality for African Americans.
It was a long one.
Long and arduous.
Yeah. And that's where you have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, right?
Each one hard-fought, expanding rights for African Americans.
But even with those amendments in place, the struggle continued. And that brings us to the Civil Rights Movement.
A powerful example of nonviolent resistance.
Inspired by Gandhi, right?
You see that influence throughout the movement. It's fascinating how they adapted his philosophy.
Like the Montgomery bus boycott.
Yeah, a classic example. Disrupting the system, peacefully making a powerful statement.
And it wasn't just about the boycotts and the marches. It was about the images, too.
Oh, absolutely. The media played a huge role.
Those shocking images of peaceful protesters being met with violence.
Broadcast into homes across the country. It forced people to confront the reality of segregation.
And I think that really helped shift public opinion.
It galvanized support for the movement.
And out of that struggle came some landmark victories. Brown v. Board of Education, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Each one a testament to the courage and resilience of those who fought for change.
But the fight for equality in the U.S., it's not just about race. It's about gender, too.
Absolutely. The women's rights movement had been gaining momentum for decades.
And they achieved a huge victory in 1920 with the 19th Amendment.
Giving women the right to vote, a historic moment.
But it didn't end there, did it?
No, not at all. It's like getting the right to vote opened up a whole new set of challenges.
And demands for equal treatment beyond just the ballot box.
Exactly. So you have the second wave of feminism in the 60s and 70s tackling issues like equal pay.
Reproductive rights, changing traditional gender roles.
These were complex issues that resonated with women from all walks of life.
And it's amazing how many of those issues are still so relevant today.
It really highlights the lasting impact of these movements. They laid the groundwork.
But also show how much work still needs to be done.
The fight for equality is an ongoing process.
And speaking of ongoing struggles, we can't forget the LGBTQ plus community.
Right. Their fight for freedom and equality has seen incredible progress, but also persistent challenges.
For much of the 20th century, being gay was criminalized, stigmatized. It wasn't until the Stonewall riots in 1969.
A real turning point.
When the LGBTQ plus community said, enough is enough.
You see a shift in strategy after Stonewall. Early organizations like the Mattachine Society, they focused on education, quiet advocacy. But after Stonewall, it becomes more assertive, more visible. It's about demanding full inclusion in society.
Not just tolerance.
Right. And we've seen some incredible strides since then, like the legalization of same-sex marriage in 2015.
But the fight continues.
It does, because the fight for LGBTQ plus rights, it intersects with so many other ongoing debates about freedom and equality in the U.S.
So we've touched on some major historical movements, but where do things stand today? What are the current debates?
Where these lines between freedom and equality get really blurred.
Yeah, where the answers aren't so clear-cut.
Well, there are a number of contemporary issues where these ideals are clashing, immigration, for instance.
Right, because that raises all these questions about border security, pathways to citizenship.
And even who gets to be considered an American.
It's a really charged issue.
Absolutely. And the issue of family separations at the border, it really brings those questions into sharp focus.
Forcing us to think about the human costs of these policies.
And how we balance security concerns with compassion and human rights.
It's definitely one of those topics where people feel very strongly on both sides. What are some other areas where these debates are happening?
Well, transgender rights are another flashpoint. We see it in debates over access to health care, particularly for trans youth.
And participation in sports, even something as basic as bathroom access,
It's often framed as individual rights versus the rights of others.
which makes it even harder to find any common ground.
That's the challenge of these issues. They force us to think about how we balance individual liberties.
With creating a society that's inclusive and equitable for everyone.
It's a tough balancing act.
And then you have the ongoing debate around reproductive freedom, which has become even more contentious lately.
Absolutely. This encompasses so many issues. Access to abortion, contraception, sex education, even the very definition of when life begins.
It feels like these debates and so many others are just getting more and more heated. Is it just me, or is it harder than ever to even have a conversation about these things?
I think you're right. It does feel that way. And I think there are a few factors at play. Political polarization is a big one.
Yeah, it's like we've lost the ability to disagree respectfully.
We've become so divided, and social media definitely doesn't help.
It's like everyone's shouting their opinions from their own little echo chambers and no one's really listening.
It's hard to find common ground when everything is so amplified and everyone's competing for attention.
And I imagine economic inequality plays a role too, when people are struggling just to get by.
Absolutely. They're more likely to feel resentful and less likely to be open to other viewpoints.
The widening gap between the rich and the poor, it fuels a lot of the anger and frustration we see in these debates.
For sure. And then you have the social divisions that have always been present in American society, prejudice based on race, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation.
It feels like those divisions are being exploited and amplified for political gain.
You're right. It makes it harder to build solidarity and work towards common goals.
But we can't talk about freedom and equality in the U.S. without specifically addressing the experience of Native Americans.
Absolutely. A community that has faced systematic oppression and marginalization since colonization.
Broken treaties, forced assimilation, the loss of land, culture, language.
And the effects of that history are still felt today.
In disparities, in health education, economic opportunity. It's a stark reminder that the pursuit of freedom and equality
has often come at the expense of others.
It's a dark chapter in American history.
One that we need to acknowledge and confront.
So it's been pretty heavy so far, all these struggles and challenges. But haven't there also been significant successes in the fight for freedom and equality in the U.S.?
Definitely. We have to acknowledge the progress that's been made. The expansion of voting rights, the legalization of same-sex marriage.
The passage of anti-discrimination laws like the Civil Rights Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act.
These are all monumental achievements. They show what's possible when people come together to demand change.
But it sounds like the journey is far from over.
It's an ongoing process. No easy answers. We're constantly evolving as a nation.
And our understanding of freedom and equality evolves right along with us.
Exactly. New challenges emerge, new debates arise, and it requires us to constantly reevaluate our values.
And our commitment to creating a society that truly lives up to its ideals.
It's an ongoing conversation.
So with all these complex and often contentious issues swirling around us, where do we even begin? How do we have productive conversations about these things without getting bogged down in anger and frustration?
That's a great question and a tough one to answer. I think a good starting point is to cultivate a sense of curiosity. A willingness to listen to perspectives that might be different from our own.
That sounds good in theory, but how do we actually do that, especially in today's polarized climate?
It takes effort, for sure. It means stepping outside of our echo chambers, engaging with people who hold different views.
And trying to understand where they're coming from, even if we don't agree with them.
Exactly. And I think empathy is key, recognizing that behind every opinion is a person.
With their own experiences and beliefs that have shaped how they see the world.
And remembering that we're all part of the same human family, even if we don't always see eye to eye.
That's powerful. And it brings us back to the heart of this deep dive, exploring the complexities of freedom and equality in the U.S.
It's a journey through history, a reflection on the present, and a call to action for the future.
It feels like this whole conversation comes down to one central question. What do freedom and equality actually mean in practice?
And how do we live up to those ideals in a way that's both meaningful and sustainable?
The million-dollar question.
I don't think there's a single easy answer. It's an ongoing process, negotiation, compromise.
A willingness to challenge our own assumptions.
Exactly. It's about growth and evolution.
Even though we've talked about some pretty heavy stuff today, I do feel a sense of hope coming out of this conversation.
Me too. When you look back at the progress that's been made, the battles that have been won,
It shows that change is possible.
it reminds us that ordinary people have the power to make a difference when they come together.
And demand a better world.
Absolutely. And it's not just about those big, sweeping societal changes either.
Right. It's about the choices we make in our everyday lives.
How we treat each other, how we interact with people who are different from us.
How we use our voices to speak up against injustice.
Exactly. It all adds up.
So if someone's listening to this and feeling overwhelmed, like the problems are just too big, what would you say to them?
Don't give up hope. Change is possible. But it requires all of us to do our part.
Find something you're passionate about, something that speaks to your values.
And get involved.
Start small, start local, but start somewhere.
The future of freedom and equality in the U.S. depends on the actions of each and every one of us.
Well, that's a great place to leave it for today. It's been an amazing journey exploring these complex and ever-evolving ideals.
It really has. The conversation's just getting started, though.
To everyone listening out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the heart of what it means to be an American. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep striving for a better tomorrow.
So many issues where these lines get blurry, like you said, immigration.
Yeah, it's such a hot-button topic, too.
Right. And it brings up all these questions about border security and pathways to citizenship for people who are already here.
Even the idea of, what it means to be an American.
Exactly. And then you have the issue of family separations at the border.
Which really throws a wrench into things.
It forces us to really think about the human cost of those policies.
It's like, how do we balance wanting secure borders with basic human compassion?
Tough questions, for sure. And it's an issue where people on both sides feel so passionately.
Definitely. So what are some other areas where these debates are playing out?
Well, transgender rights are another really big one.
Oh, yeah, that's front and center these days.
We see it in debates over access to health care, especially for transgender youth.
Sports participation.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as using the bathroom.
And those debates often get framed in terms of individual rights versus the rights of others.
Which makes it almost impossible to find any kind of middle ground.
It's the complexity of it all,
Yeah.
You have to balance individual liberties with the need to create a society that's inclusive and equitable.
For everyone.
Right. And then there's the whole debate around reproductive freedom.
Which never seems to go away.
No, it doesn't. And it's become even more heated recently.
It feels like every few years it comes back with a vengeance.
I know. And it covers so much ground: access to abortion and contraception, sex education.
Even just like the fundamental question of when does life begin?
Right. And these are such deeply personal issues for people.
Often tied to their faith or their upbringing.
It makes it really hard to have a calm, reasoned conversation about it.
And it seems like it's not just reproductive rights. It feels like all these debates are just getting more and more intense and angry.
Yeah, I think you're picking up on something real there. It does feel like it's harder than ever to talk about these things.
Without it becoming a shouting match.
Right. And I think there are a few reasons for that. Political polarization is definitely a big factor.
It's like we've lost the ability to disagree without, hating each other.
We've become so divided. And then you throw social media into the mix.
Which is basically just an accelerant for outrage.
It's like everyone's in their own echo chamber shouting their opinions and no one's really listening.
It's hard to find common ground when everyone's just trying to get the most likes or retweets.
And I think economic inequality plays a role too. When people are struggling to make ends meet.
They're more likely to be frustrated and angry.
And less open to considering other points of view.
It's like that widening gap between the rich and the poor is just feeding all this resentment and anger.
And on top of all that, you have the social divisions that have always been there in American society.
Right.
Prejudice based on race, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation.
It feels like those divisions are being exploited for political gain.
They're being used to divide us and make it even harder to create a truly inclusive society.
It's kind of a bleak picture if you think about it too long. But we can't talk about freedom and equality in the U.S. without talking specifically about the Native American experience.
You're absolutely right. It's a story of systematic oppression and marginalization going all the way back to the beginning.
I mean, you've got broken treaties, forced assimilation, The loss of land and culture and language.
And those wounds run deep. The effects are still felt today.
Yeah, we see it in the disparities in health and education and economic opportunity.
It's a stark reminder that the pursuit of freedom and equality for some,
Has often come at the expense of others.
a painful truth. We have to own that history if we ever want to move forward as a nation.
So we focused a lot on the struggles and the setbacks, but haven't there also been some pretty big wins in the fight for freedom and equality?
Absolutely. We can't forget about the progress that's been made. The expansion of voting rights over time, the legalization of same-sex marriage.
Anti-discrimination laws like the Civil Rights Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act.
These are huge achievements. They show what's possible when people organize and mobilize and demand change.
They're proof that things can get better.
They give us hope. But they also remind us that the journey isn't over.
Right. It's not like we've crossed the finish line and everything's perfect now.
It's an ongoing process. It always will be. And our understanding of what freedom and equality mean.
That's going to keep evolving too.
Exactly. We face new challenges, new questions come up, and we have to be willing to adapt and reevaluate our values.
So how do we even begin to navigate all this? It's such a complex landscape with so many different perspectives and opinions and so much anger and frustration.
It can feel overwhelming, for sure. I think a good starting point is to cultivate a sense of curiosity, a willingness to listen to people who might see things differently than we do.
That sounds nice, but how do you actually do that in the real world? And everyone's so quick to judge and condemn.
It takes effort, for sure. It means stepping outside of our comfort zones and engaging with people who hold different views.
And really trying to understand where they're coming from.
Even if we don't agree with them in the end.
It sounds like empathy is a big part of that too.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that everyone has their own story, their own experiences that have shaped their worldview.
And remembering that even when we disagree, we're all still human beings.
We're all connected in some way.
That's a powerful message. And it brings us right back to what this whole deep dive is about.
Yeah.
The complexities of freedom and equality in the U.S.
It's a journey through history, a reflection on what we are now, and a challenge to create a better future.
It feels like it all boils down to one question. What do freedom and equality actually look like in practice?
How do we live those ideals in a way that's both meaningful and sustainable?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It's the question that's been driving this whole conversation, and I don't think there's a single easy answer.
It's a process of constant evolution and reevaluation.
And a lot of hard work.
We've talked about a lot of heavy stuff today, but I have to say I'm walking away from this feeling a little bit hopeful.
Me too. I think it's important to acknowledge the progress that's been made, the victories that have been won.
They show us that change is possible.
That ordinary people can make a difference.
When they come together and fight for what they believe in.
Yeah. It's not just about those big sweeping societal changes either. It's about the choices we make every single day.
How we treat each other, how we engage with people who are different from us.
How we use our voices to speak up against injustice.
Every little bit counts, right?
Every action matters.
So if someone's listening to this and feeling totally overwhelmed, like they can't possibly make a dent in all these huge problems, what would you say to them?
I would say don't give up hope. Don't let yourself get paralyzed by the enormity of it all.
It's easy to feel like that.
Find something you're passionate about, something that speaks to your values.
And focus your energy there.
Start small, start local, but start somewhere.
Because the future of freedom and equality in this country depends on all of us.
It's up to each and every one of us to do our part.
So it really comes down to this, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What do freedom and equality actually mean when you put them into practice?
That's the big question, yeah. And there's no easy answer. It's this constant back and forth,
Trying to find that balance.
Exactly. And being willing to challenge our own assumptions about what those ideals really mean.
For all the heavy stuff we talked about today, I actually feel kind of hopeful.
Yeah, me too. I think it's important to focus on the wins, the progress that's been made.
It shows that things can change for the better.
That regular people can make a difference when they work together and stand up for what they believe in.
It's not just about, changing the whole system overnight either, right?
No, it's about the little things, too. The choices we make every day.
How we treat each other. How we interact with people who are different from us.
How we use our voices to speak up when we see injustice.
Every little bit helps.
It all adds up.
But I think a lot of people listening might feel overwhelmed, These problems are so huge. How can one person actually make a difference?
It's easy to feel that way, but I think the key is to not get paralyzed by the enormity of it all.
So what do you instead?
Find something you care about, something that aligns with your values, and then take action.
Even if it's something small.
Exactly. Start small, start local, but start somewhere.
Because the future of freedom and equality in this country really does depend on all of us.
We all have a role to play in shaping that future.
And that's a powerful thought to end on, I think. It's been such an eye-opening conversation exploring these ideals of freedom and equality.
They're at the core of what it means to be American.
And to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a journey. And we hope you'll keep questioning, keep learning, keep pushing for a better tomorrow.